Welcome back to the channel. This is Trinity Storm and you are watching 5th part of What If Naruto Was Betrayed and Destroyed the Akatsuki. If you enjoy this video, please like, share and subscribe to the channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Naruto stood firm in front of the portal, Hinata's hand in his own. He watched as the portal expanded from a pinprick to a large ominous dark hole the size of a cave mouth. Hinata gulped at the sheer darkness of the expanse that even her Byakugan couldn't penetrate before Naruto's reassuring squeeze on her own hand soothed the former Hyuga heiress. So, what's on the other side of this thing? Yamamoto shrugged and raised his shoulders. All I can say to you, Naruto, is that your first instructor is waiting for you on the other side, and don't underestimate him. He may appear to be a slacker, but he was one of my first students. Naruto unsheathed his massive blade, slowly releasing Hinata's hand. Dash. Before suddenly wrapping Hinata in a fierce hug and giving the Hyuga girl the most passionate kiss she had ever experienced in her young life, he pushed his blade point first into the floor to free his hands. Hinata was left breathless in the room, spinning in her eyes as he pulled away from her. Nell simply asked what that was, and when told it was a kiss, she turned to a very disgruntled Yugito and a rather amused Yamamoto to explain what a kiss was to her. After the explanation, Nell looked to her adoptive father and inquired, "Does that mean Naru-kun is no longer mad at Hina-chan?" Naruto answered, smiling and bending down to his daughter, ruffling her mint-colored green hair. "No, Lil One, I'm no longer angry with Hina-chan. Please be a good girl while I'm gone." "Alright," Nell said as Naruto kissed her cheek before rising. Naruto then reached for his blade, and as he hoisted it over his shoulder, he heard a voice in his head whispering, "Soon. Naruto, you and I will soon be one." With this in mind, Naruto put on his mask and stepped willingly into the unknown darkness, only to be flung out the other side, landing roughly while stumbling and falling flat on his face as he staggered forward. He righted himself and took in his surroundings with a small shiver and an irritated growl. Naruto discovered himself on the beach of a small island, surrounded by the pounding surf of the sea. The island was typical tropical, with a lush jungle teeming with palm trees and other indigenous plant life. He scratched his head as he noticed a small shanty-style shack standing at the edge of the jungle line. He removed his mask and shouted loudly, "Oi! Is there anyone here?" Almost immediately, a calm voice responded, "You don't have to yell." Naruto noticed a man lying in a hammock strung between two palm trees to the right of the shanty hut. As Naruto approached the man, he could see the person in the hammock more clearly, who in turn looked at the blonde as he approached. Naruto noticed the man in the hammock had gray eyes and long wavy brown hair tied in a long ponytail, as well as long bangs framing the left side of his face. He also wore extremely expensive-looking pinwheel hairpins and had thin facial hair around his mouth and on his cheeks. The man was dressed in a straw hat called a sacket and a pink, flowered lady's kimono that he draped across his shoulders and over the same type of uniform Yamamoto was wearing. The man asked, groggily rising into a sitting position and letting his sandaled feet hang loosely over the edge of the hammock. "How about you?" "Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. I was sent here to receive Zanpakuto training from Genryusai Shigekuni Yamamoto's protege." "Are you that person?" The man gave a small nod before leaping from the hammock and bowing down, sweeping his arm in front of him and introducing himself. "Shunsui Kyoraku is at your disposal." Naruto then noticed that Shunsui was carrying two swords, a tachi and a wakizashi blade. The blade's crossguards are rectangles with the corners cut off and decorated with a pattern of cherry petals and lines, and each has a dark blue handle. Both swords were sheathed through Shunsui's left waist tie. However, while Naruto was studying Shunsui, the former Gote captain did the same and focused his attention on Zabuza's blade, which Naruto was carrying. Before he spoke, a ghost of a smile tugged at his lips, as if in memory. So you've come to complete what Zabuza couldn't. Do you mean this Bankai thing? Naruto inquired, his Zanpakuto's massive weight borne with relative ease. Shunsui chuckled and gave a small nod before drawing both of his swords and setting the two blades against each other in a cross before declaring. But first, you must demonstrate your worth. Alright, so what exactly is this test? It's really simple. You need to kill me before I kill you. That doesn't seem fair. You already have this Bankai thing, whereas I don't. You're right. Using my Bankai on you would be unjust, but I'm not going to use it. My shikai should be able to pass this test. My shikai's name is Kaden Kyokotsu. Please keep an eye on her. Shunsui made a casual remark before yelling. When the flower wind rages, the flower god roars. When the wind of heaven rages, the underworld god sneers. What the hell happened? Naruto exclaimed, his face befuddled. Naruto was blinded by an intense flash of light a fraction of a second later. When the light faded, Shunsui appeared in front of him, his Kaden Kyokotsu having transformed his original swords into a pair of massive, heavily curved, black Chinese scimitars with silver edges. The hilt and tsuba of each blade remained unchanged from Kaden Kyokotsu's sealed form, but they now had long red tassels dangling from the end. Naruto had never seen anything like it. I'd stop staring and concentrate, Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, because I'm going to come at you with a killing intent. As he boldly declared, the blonde swallowed nervously, a bead of sweat running down his face. I do not fear. Shunsui chuckled and moved his blades into an attack stance in response to this statement. We'll see, but let's get started. As Shunsui extended Kaden Kyokotsu to each side before saying, the air became thick with power. I should warn you that the power of Kaden Kyokotsu is capable of making children's games come true. The Zanpakuto makes the rules, and anyone who comes within its spiritual pressure, including myself, is forced to follow them. And what are its regulations? Naruto inquired. It's actually pretty simple. If you win, you live. If you lose, you die. Shunsui then began to rotate with both blades facing in opposite directions, creating large wind blades that Kaden Kyokotsu fired at Naruto. The wind blades joined together to form a spinning circle of wind that, if it struck Naruto, would envelop him with tornado-like intensity. The blonde Jinchuriki was not going to let that happen and performed a series of hand gestures before thrusting his arms forward in the direction of the oncoming attack. A powerful gust of wind erupted from his hands, indicating Naruto had used his Repusho, Gale Wind Palm technique, and it collided with Shinsui's spinning circle of wind with tremendous force, cancelling out the two wind attacks. However, before Gote Captain could plan another attack, Naruto shushened over to his position and began attacking him with thrusts and slashes from his Zanpakuto. Interesting, he already knows a form of Shunpo, Flash Step, and wind attacks in this world. Let's see how powerful and skilled he is with the Zanpakuto. While dodging a strike from Naruto's blade, Shunsui thought to himself. The two combatants circled and danced around each other with deadly grace, looking for openings and littering each other with superficial cuts that did not kill but did bleed. The sweet hum of the blades slicing through the air, the sizzle and crackle as they collided with sparks flying, was almost like a musical concerto of their battle. The Gote Captain was suitably impressed by his opponent's skill after a while. Shunsui had over a century of kenjutsu experience, but Naruto was matching him with every parry and stroke. Naruto's 3 years of Black Ops and Hunter Nin missions had clearly transformed him into a deadly swordsman.
Shunsui deftly blocked Naruto's overhead swing with both of his blades, causing a small crater under the Gote Captain's feet.
Shunsui claimed he felt his bones creak under the intense pressure and power of the attack and realized Naruto was channeling chakra into his sword arm to strengthen his strikes. The Goten captain knew he couldn't afford any mistakes against this opponent, so he shifted his swords, allowing the powerhouse strike to slip off to the side and destroy the ground to his right. The blow caused a large cloud of sand and dust to billow up, obscuring Naruto's vision and allowing Shunsui to shunpo behind the former Leaf Junin. Shunsui thrust one of his blades forward, hoping to end this fight quickly. He was taken aback, however, when Naruto grabbed the blade with his bare left hand and held it in place. Ignoring the searing pain in his hand, Naruto yanked the blade off course, drawing the Goten captain in closer. Naruto then planted his left foot and pivoted to skewer his now vulnerable opponent through the chest with his Zanpakuto sword. Shunsui realized he had a problem the moment Naruto grabbed one of his blades and started pulling. Instead of fighting the pull, he threw himself in the direction he was being dragged in. Twisting his body to its fullest, Naruto's blade point narrowly missed, fatally striking the Goten captain, who was able to bring his other sword around in time to parry Naruto's strike. Naruto grumbled in frustration and launched into a series of chakra-enhanced strikes, hoping to overwhelm his opponent once and for all through strength alone. The Goten captain, for one, had decided that enough was enough and that Naruto's true test had begun. After a few minutes, Naruto's strategy of simply overwhelming his opponent with brute force appeared to be working. Shunsui became increasingly sluggish as the fight progressed, and he was now merely on the defensive. Every time the Goten captain went on the offensive, Naruto was able to dodge all of the attacks in an impressive display of agility and speed, sending back a few effective counter-attacks that littered Shunsui with cuts along his chest and arms. Finally, the Goten captain was too slow to dodge, and Shunsui discovered Naruto's Zanpakuto embedded in his left shoulder blade, forcing the man to drop one of his scimitars to the ground. Shunsui knelt on one knee, Naruto's blade still firmly embedded in his shoulder, and held his other scimitar blade in a defensive position. Unfortunately, the pain in his shoulder was excruciating as he swayed unsteadily on the ground before Naruto, who knocked the remaining sword out of his opponent's hand with one swift stroke, leaving the man defenseless. The blonde Jinchuriki then heard his opponent gasp out a labored breath. "Complete it. Namikaze Naruto Uzumaki, I told you at the start that if you win, you live. If you lose, you die. You've won. I've lost. Now strike me down and call it a day." Naruto ripped Shunsui's Zanpakuto from his shoulder, causing the man to grunt in pain. Grabbing the hilt with both hands and raising it above his head, a simple down stroke would cleave the Goten captain in half. Shunsui saw his opponent raise his sword and gave the blonde man a small grin before closing his eyes and waiting for the final blow that would end his life. Naruto let out a monstrous roar and swung his Zanpakuto downwards. No. Shunsui opened his eyes a few seconds later to see Naruto's blade embedded in the sand next to him, while Naruto stood over him with his arms crossed and breathing heavily before spitting with anger and contempt. "No, I'm not going to kill you. I have no reason to. And if you bring up that nonsense about the game's rules, I don't give a damn what they say. I'm not going to kill anyone just because some stupid rules require it." Shunsui smiled and quickly rose to his feet, surprising Naruto, who had thought the man was barely conscious only moments before. The blonde Jinchuriki watched as the wound he had just inflicted on his foe began to heal itself at an astonishing rate. "I commend you, Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. You were the first to figure out the true meaning of the test and the only man to ever survive it. In this regard, I have nothing else to teach you." Shunsui saw Naruto's confused expression as he released Kaiten Kyokotsu and sheathed both of his blades again and chuckled before saying, "You passed the test and demonstrated that you are your own master. Well done. You say I'm the first to complete this test, but only the second to survive it. Who was the first person to survive?" The first was your Zanpakuto Momochi Zabuza's previous owner. For you see, Zabuza was able to demonstrate that he, too, was his own master, but he was unable to complete the second part of the test. Naruto licked his wounds and stretched, taking careful note of what he was being told. You see, you had the opportunity to kill me, but you didn't. Instead, you spared me, as befits a true justice warrior, one who does not bring unnecessary bloodshed or blindly follow rules like an obedient lapdog. He shook his head in disgust, looking away. Unfortunately, Zabuza loved any opportunity to commit unnecessary bloodshed, so when that opportunity always presented itself during the test, he was always taking it, and as a result, he failed the trial time and time again. Naruto was surprised when the Gote captain extended his hand to the blonde. If it doesn't bother you, I'd like to accompany you back to the living world, if not as a mentor, then as an ally. Naruto looked at the hand suspiciously, on high alert. Do you mean you'd be willing to join me in my party and work toward our common goals? Shunsui nodded before making his statement. If they're worthy, I'd be honored to lend you my sword not only to you, but also to your comrades. Besides, how long have I been cooped up on this island in this dimension? And if I don't see a woman soon, I'll go insane. Naruto chuckled at this, taking the extended hand and shaking it firmly. Then, Shunsui Kyoraku, welcome to Team Fox. Soon after they shook hands, a portal appeared behind Naruto, followed by another behind Shunsui. The one near Naruto was black, while the one near Shunsui was white as snow. Sensing the blonde's perplexity, the straw hat-wearing captain responded to Naruto's unspoken question by releasing Naruto's hand from his grip and saying, "The portal you see behind me leads back to Old Man Yama's house. The one behind you is the gateway to the second trial. I will inform your comrades of our agreement when I return." Shunsui then stepped into the white before turning around again. "Good luck on your second trial, Naruto." Then he was gone in a flash of white. As he gazed into the black abyss, the Jinchuriki sighed. There would be no more postponements. Every second he paused was another life lost in the land of snow. Alright, here I go. While wondering, Naruto yelled as he charged back into the darkness. What new test awaited me on the other side? Meanwhile, back in Konoha, Tsunade was vigorously massaging her temples in an attempt to alleviate the agonizing headache she had developed over the previous 2 hours. Emissaries from both the Hyuga and Inuzuka clans had expressed their concerns about their missing heirs. To make matters even more complicated, the Haruno family and the Yamanaka clan both expressed concern about their now missing children. While the Hyuga and Inuzuka clans had been respectful enough to Tsunade to ask for the Hokage's assistance in finding them, they essentially demanded that Tsunade do something to ensure the return of their missing clan members. Tsunade's patience had worn thin after listening to the shouts, demands, and squabbles that had erupted for over 2 hours. She told everyone to go home and promised to send out a search party consisting of 2 of her best Junin shinobi to find and return everyone's missing family members. Tsunade smiled as she scanned her list of available Junin and came across 2 names that were available for duty. And considering who all the missing shinobi were, these 2 would be ideal for the mission given their relationships with all of the AWOL nin. She wanted these shinobi in her office first thing in the morning, so she wrote down their names and gave them to a messenger. Tsunade then went on a frantic search for her sake, as nothing was a better remedy for a headache. In her opinion, at least. Kurenai's annoyance grew with each passing minute as she waited patiently in the Hokage's office for Tsunade. The source of her annoyance was the other office occupant seated next to her at the time, one Kakashi Hatake. It wasn't that Kakashi was a bad person or that his demeanor irritated Kurenai. No, the main source of her rage was the copy nin's insatiable desire to read that perverted novel no matter who was around. It didn't matter if Kakashi was with women or children. He'd just keep reading his pornography, oblivious to anyone nearby who might be offended by that smut. Nothing got under Kurenai's skin like perverted behavior. Tsunade walked into the office and growled just as she was about to angrily tell a giggling Kakashi to put that book away. "Kakashi, put that damn book away before I permanently ban its possession in the village." Kakashi protectively drew the book back to his chest and stammered in disbelief as he clutched his most prized possession. "I don't want Jiraiya's legacy to be associated with those damn books. His legacy should be him looking down from heaven and seeing his last pupil become Hokage." Tsunade yelled at Kakashi, fighting back tears at the thought of her lost teammate, friend, and love. The atmosphere in the room had quickly darkened. "I understand, Hokage-sama," Kakashi said solemnly, tucking his book inside his Junin vest. Tsunade sat in her chair for a moment to relax. "I've summoned you both here to assign you to a missing nin retrieval mission." The two Junin exchanged glances before returning their gaze to the blonde Hokage. "You are two of my finest Junin, and because of your personal relationships with these missing nins, I believe you have the best chance of bringing them all home." Kakashi and Kurenai exchanged puzzled looks before turning back to Tsunade, and Kurenai inquired, "Who are these missing nins you're talking about, Hokage-sama?" Tsunade let the bomb fall by tying her fingers together in front of her. "The mission I'm sending the two of you on is to find some of your misbehaving students." Kakashi scratched the back of his head, puzzled, before saying, "Hokage-sama, our students, we." Kurenai now spoke after completing his statement. "We haven't had any students since Teams 7 and 8 disbanded a few years ago," says the coach. "They may no longer be your students, but can you both honestly say that when you look at them, you don't consider yourselves their teachers?" Tsunade continued on, and both Junin silently nodded their heads in acceptance. "The reason you're both here is that each of you has two former students who are currently AWOL from the village, and if they aren't found soon, I may be forced to declare them missing nin and issue a capture or kill order to our Anbu hunter nins on all of them due to the council's meddling." The two Junin gasped, knowing full well the consequences of that order. Tsunade heaved a heavy sigh as he laid the photo of Naruto and Jiraiya flat and out of sight. She couldn't bear looking her old friend in the eyes and admitting to her long-dead teammate that she had failed. She announced, looking back at the two Junin in front of her. "I've already done this to one of them because of the council, even though it has broken my heart, and I don't want to do it to the others because it will be my final official act as Hokage of this village if I do." "Who is missing, Hokage-sama?" Kurenai inquired, her voice trembling with concern. "You both know Naruto left the village 3 weeks ago, so I sent Team Asuma, the Ino Shika Cho trio, after him. I figured Shikamaru would be able to quickly deduce where Naruto might go, and I was right. They found him and engaged Naruto in battle." Her scowl darkened her face. They had been thoroughly beaten. Kurenai stiffened slightly when Asuma's name was mentioned. They had only recently started dating when he was killed while on a mission by Akatsuki member Hidan. She missed her fellow Junin and friend and often wondered what might have happened if he had lived. Kakashi's voice interrupted her train of thought. "How badly did they get hurt, Hokage-sama?" Kakashi inquired. Her tone softened slightly as she said this. "Surprisingly, or perhaps not, they did not sustain any serious injuries. Choji suffered the most because he tried to kill Naruto when he thought Naruto had killed Shikamaru." Tsunade sighed for the millionth time as she looked out her window into the morning sun before continuing to speak. Apparently Naruto had no desire to harm or kill any of them, because if he had, Shikamaru claims they would be dead. "He's that powerful?" Kurenai inquired of her fellow Junin. Tsunade continued on with just a nod from Kakashi. "Following that incident, I recalled Team Guy, whom I had also sent out in search of Naruto, lest they be injured while attempting to apprehend him. It was after this that several members of both your teams went AWOL. Who? Both Junin asked at the same time. She dreaded her own words once more. Bad news seemed to be all she seemed to convey these days. First, there was Hinata, who apparently did not enjoy life as an Inuzuka, as evidenced by the note she left for Kiba. What? Did it say, Hokage-sama? Kurenai inquired hesitantly. You'd expect Hinata to try to make the marriage work and to love Kiba as a close friend. She blames herself for not standing up to her family and going through with the arranged marriage. She knows her departure will cause Kiba pain, and she hopes he can forgive her, but she must find the one man who has always held her heart, and if she can bring him home, she will not return, etc., etc. As he considered the potential loss of another shinobi, Kakashi shook his head sadly. What has happened to this village? Kurenai leaned forward, burying her face in her hands, trying to keep the tears from welling up in her eyes. With a heavy sigh and a wipe of her eyes, she leaned back and said, with resignation. So she lies even in her farewell letter. What do you mean, Kurenai? Tsunade inquired, intrigued. Kurenai's crimson eyes narrowed and her face tightened in barely suppressed rage. What I mean is that Hinata's marriage was a farce from the start. I know how much Hinata loved Naruto 3 years ago, and she would never betray him the way she did unless her father somehow forced her to. I remember questioning her about why she was suddenly marrying Kiba, but all she would say was she had no choice. And no matter what I said or how hard I pressed her, Hinata wouldn't elaborate further. The timing of her departure is odd given her sister Hanabi and Konohamaru were married just 2 weeks ago, Tsunade pondered. Unfortunately, this brought Tsunade to the second part of the story. Well, speaking of Kiba, before you begin this mission, you might want to speak with your lone remaining student, Shino, about him, Kurenai. According to Shino, Kiba is not dealing well with Hinata's departure, and he apparently exchanged some words with him before he left the village to retrieve his wife. Kurenai solemnly nodded. I'll do it, Hokage-sama. It was now Kakashi's turn to speak. I already know about Naruto, Hokage-sama. Which of my other students is missing, or both of them? Inquired the lazy Junin. We suspect Sakura left before Kiba to pursue Naruto, while Sasuke begged me to let him go and find Naruto, so I dispatched him on a mission to retrieve him within 2 weeks. And Kakashi wondered, suspecting there was more to it than he was being told. There was one. That 2-week period ended over a week ago, and I told Sasuke that if he was unable to complete his task, his orders would be changed from retrieval to a capture or kill order for him to execute, Tsunade replied, her head bowed in shame. What did you do? Kakashi exclaimed as he jumped out of his chair. Tsunade leapt up 10 times as angry, as evidenced by the tears sparkling in her hazel eyes. Do you think I really wanted to? Naruto is a dangerous threat to our village as long as the Kyuubi is sealed within him, but more importantly, he is in danger himself. Madara Uchiha and the remaining Akatsuki are still out there trying to capture Naruto, and we cannot let them get their hands on the Kyuubi. She took a deep breath, panting heavily from the outburst of rage. You know what will happen if they do. Naruto will be killed anyway, and they'll have the most powerful Biju at their disposal, and we'll be done. Tsunade yelled, tears streaming down her cheeks. Tsunade's pained expression told Kakashi that what she had ordered was killing her on the inside, and he found himself unable to refute her argument. He sat back down, his hands balled into fists in frustration, and said stoically, I comprehend. Hokage-sama. I hope so, Kakashi, because I'm giving you the same capture or kill order. Unless you believe you can bring Naruto back to life, he will have to be eliminated, Tsunade stammered, her voice tinged with despair. Kakashi could only look at Tsunade, shocked and enraged that she would issue that order to him as well. It took all of his strength and willpower just to keep his killing intent in check and say through clenched teeth behind his mask. "Good day, Hokage-sama." Tsunade knew Kakashi despised her at the time, and she didn't blame him. But she had a duty as Hokage to protect this village no matter what, and Tsunade had never imagined that the threat could come from Naruto himself. While dismissing Kakashi and Kurenai and watching them approach her door, she suddenly remembered something and ordered them to stop before saying anything. "I was so preoccupied with your students that I almost forgot to tell you this. Ino Yamanaka also went AWOL a few hours after Kiba, so she's out there looking for Naruto as well. Bring her back as well." Kurenai raised a dark brow. "Why is Ino looking for Naruto?" "I'm not sure, Kurenai, but I think it's for the same reasons Hinata and Sakura did." "I understand, Hokage-sama," Kurenai said, blushing slightly. As the two Junin turned to leave the office with Kakashi, they heard their Hokage make a desperate plea. "Please, please, please bring them all home." The two Junin returned to Tsunade and both nodded in agreement before departing on what may be the most important mission of their lives from a personal standpoint. Ino was astounded by how effortlessly Sasuke continued to jump from tree to tree through the forest. "How can he keep going, Kami?" They had been traveling for the majority of the morning, and while Ino had greatly improved her physical abilities since their younger days, fatigue was beginning to slow her down. Looking up at the sun, she noticed it was about midday and called out to Sasuke. "Sasuke, it's midday. Can we take a quick break and eat lunch?" Sasuke looked up at the sky, then back to Ino, nodding and pointing to a small clearing near a creek. Both Leaf Shinobi landed in the clearing and sat down, each leaning against a different tree. Ino and Sasuke both took out their field rations and ate quietly, their minds on Naruto. After finishing their meals and refilling their canteens from the creek, they sat down again as Sasuke took the sword he was carrying off his back and examined it closely, as if looking for something. When she saw the obsidian-eyed man across from her looking at the blade, Ino's inquisitive nature surfaced. "I don't recall you carrying a sword before, Sasuke, is that something new?" "It's a Zanpakuto, not a sword, Ino, and yes, it's new." The blonde persisted, her curiosity not satisfied. "It appears to be very old." "Where did you get it?" "It is both old and powerful. I recently purchased it from a man named Byakuya Kuchiki. I've heard stories about the Kuchiki clan. They are members of the Soul Society cult and are said to hunt down demons." As she inquired, Ino's face revealed a puzzled expression. "But why do you need a demon-killing weapon?" Sasuke cast a quick glance at Ino's eyes before turning his head to the side and remaining silent. Ino's eyes widened with startled horror at that moment, and she realized why Sasuke had that sword. She rose to her feet, her body shaking as tears welled up in her eyes, and pointed accusingly at the Uchiha, screamed with hatred at him. "You liar, you! You said you were looking for Naruto like me, but you're not." The blonde kunoichi spat in his face as he opened his mouth to speak. "You just want to find him and kill him." Sasuke wiped the saliva from his face in disgust before vehemently denying. "I swear it's not true. I'm here on Hokage Tsunade's orders to find Naruto and return him to Konoha." Sasuke begged, leaping to his feet. "Then why do you need the sword?" she hissed, unconvinced by even the most blatant of his intentions. Sasuke turned his head to the side once more and spoke in a choked voice, the words clearly painful for him to say. "I need the sword because Tsunade has ordered me to eliminate Naruto if I can't persuade him to return to the village." Ino shook her head in disbelief, refusing to believe it was true. I can't believe that old hag would order that. I thought she was a Naruto fan?" She then vented on him once more. "And you, of all people, did it." Sasuke, haven't you already hurt Naruto enough in your life? Every single one of her words was true. She has no choice, Ino, and yes, I am aware of the pain I have caused Naruto. From my desert and our fight in the Valley of the End, where I rammed a Chidori into his chest, to all the battles we had until the final one, where he brought me home. His shoulders sagged as a melancholy sigh escaped his lips. I know I've caused him a lot of grief. The blonde snorted and considered slapping him on the head. HMPH, you're just talking about the physical pain, which I'm sure Naruto has long forgiven you for. You forgot to mention how you broke his heart after you returned. Sasuke did a double take, shock written all over his face. Well, what are you on about? She did slap him across the face, quite hard. Don't be a fool, Sasuke. When you and Sakura returned, you did a number on him. Naruto would have left the village much sooner if it hadn't been for Hinata picking up the pieces. What did Sakura and I do? His head shook. I'm not sure what you're talking about. Ino stared at Sasuke until she noticed the puzzled expression on his face and in his eyes. You have no idea what I'm talking about, do you? He shook his head and shot her a glare as he sheathed his blade. No, I don't. Tell me what Sakura and I did to Naruto. You took your best friend's girlfriend away from him on the day he was going to propose to her, Sasuke. Her violent response killed the anger on his face and was replaced with horrified realization. You mean Sakura, girlfriend? No way. Sakura told me when I returned that she and Naruto were just friends. Families, friends. They dated for almost 3 years before you returned, Sasuke. Ino yelled in his face. You're telling the truth. Sasuke accused the Yamanaka girl before shoving the stunned Uchiha backwards into a nearby tree and screaming. They began dating soon after he returned from his training with Jiraiya-sama. I know because I had to listen to Sakura for 3 years about how wonderful Naruto is and how much she and he loved each other. Sasuke refused to believe it, shaking his head quickly in denial. That can't be true. Sakura said she only loved me and waited for my return. HMPH, if that's true, Sasuke, I guess Naruto wasn't the only one Sakura fooled. I remember the day you and the forehead girl destroyed him. I was working at the hospital at the time. Sasuke leaned against the tree, arms crossed across his chest, listening intently to the story. I recall Naruto coming in and showing me the engagement ring he had purchased for Sakura. It had been a week since he had returned you, and you were still recovering from your injuries. So far, she has the timeline correct, he thought. Naruto wanted my opinion on whether Sakura would like the ring or not, and by the way, it was a beautiful ring. I don't know where he got it, but it actually had a pink hue to it. Sakura would have loved it. Her eyes had taken on a distant, semi-sad expression. I then recall Naruto asking where Sakura was because he needed to ask her right away. I told him she was in your room down the hall, and do you want to know his reaction? I still remember it word for word. Wow. I can ask Sakura-chan to marry me and the Teme to be my best man all at once. I then saw Naruto dash down the hall and open the door to your room, but he never entered. As Ino described every explicit detail, horrified guilt clutched at Sasuke's stomach, tying it into a tight knot. He just stood there in the doorway, motionless, staring into your room with the most blank expression I've ever seen on anyone's face. Finally, I saw him shut the door and drop something into a nearby wastebasket before proceeding down the hall to leave. I remember running down the hall and looking into the basket only to discover it was the ring he threw away. I couldn't imagine what would make Naruto do such a thing until I opened your door and saw Sakura with her skirt hiked up and bouncing up and down your midsection moaning like the cheap whore she is on your bed. It was all I could do not to go in and kill the both of you for what you had done. Ino finished the story by clapping her hands with imaginary dirt and folding her arms over her double C breasts. I'm sure a chidori to the chest is painful, but it's nothing compared to the pain you inflicted on Naruto that day of seeing his supposed best friend and brother fucking the girl he had loved his entire life. The same girl he had decided he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. Sasuke fell to his knees as memories of the day Ino mentioned came flooding back to him. He'd been in the hospital recovering from the injuries he'd sustained in Naruto's final battle. During that week, Sakura had looked after him practically 24 hours a day. Sasuke had to admit that he had noticed her at the time. Sakura was no longer the gangly teenager he had left unconscious on a bench, but had grown into a stunning young lady in the intervening years. During that week, Sasuke's thoughts had turned to the possibility of being more than just friends with her. He eventually decided to ask Sakura to be his girlfriend, but he was unsure. How did she feel about Naruto now that he was gone? He was relieved when she told him they were nothing more than friends. When Sasuke suggested they become a couple, Sakura squealed with delight and kissed him, and the rest had been accurately described by Ino. Looking up into her blue eyes, Sasuke desperately searched for any sign that the Yamanaka girl was lying to him about everything, but finding none, he knew everything she said was true. Looking back to the ground, he expressed his despair. I didn't know Ino. I swear I would never have done that to Naruto if I had known. I wondered why Naruto avoided us after we became a couple. I wanted to ask him what was going on, but Sakura told me that Naruto was just being childish because of his silly crush on her and that she had chosen me to be with instead of him. She persuaded me that we should just leave him alone and he would eventually get over it, and I thought she was right when, after a few months, he did start interacting with us again. Why would he do that after what we did to him? And why didn't anyone tell me about Naruto and Sakura? Ino's response was straightforward. The answer to your first question is Hinata. She finally found the courage to tell Naruto that she truly did love him, and Hinata would never use Naruto the way Sakura did, as a replacement tool for her own selfish needs until you returned. Hinata helped to heal Naruto's shattered heart and soul, and eventually, Naruto fell in love with her, and it was only after that that we all started seeing Naruto around again. Another Sasuke memory flashed through his mind. It was the first time he had seen Naruto since being released from the hospital and beginning his relationship with Sakura. Hearing what Ino had just said, another puzzle piece fell into place, explaining that strange encounter that had always bothered him. Sasuke commented, shaking his head in disbelief at his own stupidity. I recall. The first time Sakura and I ran into Naruto while walking through the park. It had been nearly a year since either of us had seen him, and I was surprised to see him holding hands with Hinata when I did. I remember congratulating Naruto when I found out he and Hinata were dating, but I never understood why Sakura and Hinata kept staring at each other and then became agitated when I suggested we all go on a double date. The pieces were quickly falling into place, and it was not a pretty picture. Naruto just laughed it off and flashed that goofy grin before making up some excuse about him and Hinata having to be somewhere, and then they left. I should have known something was wrong when Sakura complained to me about Hinata spending the rest of the day with Naruto. I'm such a moron, but how come no one ever told me about Naruto and Sakura? Well, Sasuke, I'm not surprised at all by Sakura's reaction when she first saw Naruto and Hinata together. I'm sure Forehead Girl wanted to be with you, but Naruto will still pine for her for the rest of his life. As she spoke about Sakura, Ino's tone was dripping with acidic venom. I'm sure Sakura and her ego were horrified at the prospect of Naruto falling in love with someone other than her. The reason I or anyone else did not tell you about Naruto and Sakura's previous relationship is because Naruto told us not to. Why would he do that? Naruto said he didn't want you to know because he wanted to see Sasuke happy. Sakura didn't want to ruin your happiness for any reason. He also stated that what happened in the past was no longer relevant. He'd met Hinata, and the two of them were in love and happy for the rest of their lives. Of course, you already know about the tragedy of what happened to them 2 years later, she sighed, as they had been doing too much of that. Sasuke, too, resisted the urge to sigh again. Yeah, I know, and what happened to Naruto still haunts him to this day. One of the last things Naruto said to me before knocking me out was that the Naruto I knew had died 3 years ago. Well, I know it still haunts Hinata. Damn her family and Kiba for torturing them. Ino spat angrily before adding. Now that you know about all of this, Sasuke, and the pain you've caused Naruto, tell me. Are you still planning to murder your best friend? He shook his head and began to pace. I'm not sure what I'm going to do now, Ino. I'll make that decision when the time comes. But I can't make you any promises either way. Damn you, Sasuke Uchiha. All hell broke loose, and Ino roughly tackled Sasuke to the ground, holding him there by both of his arms, her face murderous. I'm not going to let you hurt Naruto-kun any longer. Fuck you. You've been standing here judging me for the pain I've caused Naruto. What about the pain you've caused him? Sasuke retorted immediately. She was prepared for this, speaking slowly and deliberately, as if she wanted to make her point clearly. Fuck you too. You think I don't know I also contributed to the Naruto we have today? I was the one who tried to resurrect him after Hinata's marriage. I stayed with him for a year as he gradually healed and we grew closer. Then I did the unthinkable. I was given a choice and chose incorrectly, and I've hated myself ever since. She abruptly rose and turned around, her hands balled into fists at her sides, her back to him. That's why I'm here. I adore Naruto-kun and wish to bring him home and spend time with him if he will allow it. I'm not sure if he will, and I can't blame him if he doesn't, but even if he doesn't love me the way I love him, I still want him to be a part of my life. Her next words were a desperate whisper, pleading with the heavens. I just hope Naruto-kun will still let me be a part of his life when we find him. I doubt Shikamaru will be pleased with what you're doing, Ino, Sasuke remarked as he picked himself up, dusting off the dirt and mud from the tackle. With a glance over her shoulder, Ino simply scoffed at Uchiha's words before looking away and saying, For the record, Shikamaru has no objections to what I'm doing because we've broken up and he was the one who pushed me to go after Naruto. Shika wants me to be happy and follow my heart, even if it isn't with him, and for that I will always love and be grateful to him. His next words took all of her rage away. I said the same thing to Sakura. What are you on about? She stammered, turning reluctantly to face him. Before Naruto left, Sakura broke off our engagement. She expressed her desire to be with Naruto, and I advised her to follow her heart and be happy. I'm sorry, Sasuke, I didn't realize. Are you okay? It hurt at first, but after learning from you that my entire 5-year relationship with Sakura was based on a lie, it's no longer so bad. Now I'm relieved that she did put an end to it. Well, if Sakura thinks she'll just walk back into Naruto's life after what she did, she's in for a surprise. I'll kill her myself if that happens. Only if I don't find her first, Ino. Alright, let's get started. The sooner we find Naruto, the sooner we can get things back on track. But, just so you know, if you try to kill Naruto-kun when we find him, you'll have to first get through me. Do you understand? His lips curved into a small smile. I comprehend. As Ino and Sasuke prepared to resume their search for Naruto, another pair of missing Konoha shinobi decided to take a short break before continuing their search. Sakura was haunted by Kiba's words days ago to kill Naruto and Hinata if Hinata did not return to Konoha with him after traveling for several hours in silence. When Kiba made that threat, the look on his face was so feral, almost animalistic, and combined with the malevolence ringing in his voice as he said it, it frightened Sakura greatly. Kiba was no longer the friend and comrade she had grown up knowing, but a complete stranger at that moment. However, Sakura was perplexed as she watched Kiba play with Akamaru because he spoke and acted exactly as she remembered him as a child. Sakura hesitantly asked, deciding to take a chance and summoning the courage to speak with the Inuzuka heir. "Kei Kiba, did you really mean what you said when we first met?" "What about?" Kiba replied, puzzled, before sitting across from Sakura and leaning against a tree. "You know how you wanted to kill Naruto and Hinata if she didn't come home with you." Kiba's expression darkened instantly as he furrowed his brow into a scowl at the mention of Naruto's name. As he responded to Sakura's question, his voice became more menacingly cold. "I don't want to kill anyone, Sakura, let alone Naruto or my wife. But if they force me to, I will kill both of them. I promise that if Hinata returns to me, everything will be fine and no one will be hurt." His clawed hands ground into the log, removing shavings. "But if she refuses, I'm not responsible for what happens next. That will be on Naruto's shoulders, not mine." Sakura tried in vain to protest. But Kiba, how is Hinata refusing to return to Konoha because of you, Naruto? He didn't kidnap or take Hinata when he left. As you stated, Hinata pursued him on her own. I'm not sure what's going on between you and Hinata, but you seem to be blaming Naruto for your problems with Hinata for no apparent reason. I have every reason to blame Naruto for everything. This was illogical. How come, Kiba? Because if it weren't for Naruto, Hinata would love me instead of him. Wait, what? Look, Sakura, it's simple when you think about it. Hinata is not Naruto's wife. She needs to learn to love me rather than Naruto, but how can she do so while he is still alive? He sighed happily as a distant look appeared in his eyes. I was overjoyed when I heard Naruto had left the village. I knew that now that he was gone, Hinata could finally begin to love me instead of him. I wouldn't have to watch her mope around for the next 3 years, or see the fake smiles she'd give me. He nodded to himself, as if to reassure himself. Now that Naruto is gone, Hinata can finally understand that she belongs to me, not to him. The look returned, along with the venom. But even with Naruto gone, he still messes up my life because Hinata can't seem to let him go. But that will change. Hinata will submit and learn to love me in order to be the proper wife I deserve. Yeah, Kiba, if you're a freaking lunatic, it's really easy to understand your thinking. Sakura thought to herself before shaking her head sadly and saying, I'm sorry, Kiba, but love does not work like that. You can't make someone love you if they love someone else. Hinata adores Naruto even when they are not together. It makes no difference whether he is in the village or not. No matter how hard they try, a person will never learn to love someone if their heart belongs to someone else. Believe me, Kiba. I've had to learn that lesson the hard way for the last 5 years of my life. Sakura, do you know what? I don't care what you, Shino, or anyone else says about it. Hinata is mine, not Naruto's, and once she realizes that, everything will be fine. Kiba, you talk about Hinata as if she's a possession. Women aren't objects that can be owned. Kiba leapt from the log, his rage boiling over, growling fiercely as he glared at her. Grr, I'm sick of talking about it. This conversation, and you, Sakura, are starting to irritate me. On this, you're either with me or against me. Will you assist me with Hinata or not? Sakura raised her gaze to Kiba's face, which had taken on the feral appearance she had noticed when they first met. And the malevolent and venomous tone in his voice had returned, causing Akamaru to whimper. Sakura realized she had pushed things too far and needed to tread carefully with her next words. She took a moment to gather herself before speaking in as calm and steady a voice as she could muster. I'm with you, Kiba, and once we find Hinata, I'll assist you, Kiba then smiled brightly at Sakura and said in a sweet voice, as if someone had flipped an unseen switch. "Alright, let's get this party started." Sakura mused to herself as she watched Kiba begin to repack his supplies while doing the same. "I'm with you, Kiba, because I need you right now, but once we find Naruto, all bets are off." When Naruto emerged from the portal, he looked around, warily observing the terrain, or rather its lack thereof. The portal vanished behind him, and he found himself standing atop a cliff, peering down to see a rolling black sea with waves crashing against the rocky shore, spraying salt into his face. Behind him was nothing but a rocky plain, with nothing visible for miles. Rain fell and thunder rumbled in the pitch-black cloudy sky, followed by lightning, and he looked up and closed his eyes. As the gore washed away from him, Naruto let the water wash away the blood-stained filth from his clothes, his hands hanging loosely at his sides, water beating off his mask and into his face. He grabbed his blade and noticed it felt lighter. Looking down at it, he arched an eyebrow, as his blade seemed to have changed in some way, though he wasn't sure when that happened. It was still quite large, but not nearly as much as before. In comparison, it was sleeker. It now resembled an oversized butcher knife, and the handle was firmly grasped in his hand, its handle wrapped tightly in cloth, the end trailing loosely in the sharp breeze of the approaching storm. He examined it while jamming its tip into the ground. The serrated edge was now a bright silver shimmer, while the tip and upper half of the blade were completely black. A voice rang out in his mind as he examined his newly transformed Zanpakuto. "Zangetsu, please." The name Zangetsu rang in his head, and he realized it had to be the shikai name for his blade. "Naruto, you're almost there." Nodding, Naruto could now tell the voice was male because of its deep bass undertone. "You're my Zanpakuto, then. It's taken you a long time, but I'm glad to finally speak with you." The feeling's mutual. Now what is the extent of shikai power? Naruto wondered, swiping his new blade around to get a feel for it. "Getsuga Tenshou, shout as you swing the blade towards that boulder." Naruto shrugged his shoulders and screamed angrily. "Tenshou Getsuga." As Naruto swung the Zanpakuto towards the massive rock, he was struck by how light it felt despite being nearly as large as when Zabuza wielded it. Even more shocking to the blonde Jinchuriki was seeing a wave of blue light engulfing the blade, before the wave shot out in a crescent shape and impacted the mighty boulder with tremendous force, obliterating the stone into dust. As the dust and debris from the blow settled, steam appeared to be rising from the blade, and a wicked grin spread across the blonde's face. "Wait, what did you say?" "Getsuga Tenshou, or Moonfang piercing the heavens in your language." Naruto swung again, this time calling out the name of the attack, and was rewarded with another wave, then another, and another as he swung wildly into the air. Before asking, the Jinchuriki came to a halt and looked down at his blade in reverent awe. "From where does this power come?" "It is the power that you possess. When you slash, your spiritual pressure, or chakra, is absorbed and then releases highly condensed spiritual energy at the tip of the blade, magnifying the slash attack and propelling you forward. That is Zangetsu's shikai form's power. There is nothing you cannot cut with me." "Anything at all?" Naruto was very excited about the prospects and potential of that. As he felt new power course through him, a chuckle escaped his lips and quickly twisted into a confident laugh, his head thrown back as he basked in the blue glow of his strength. "Beware, my enemies. With this, I shall tear all my enemies asunder." Naruto roared to the heavens through the cold metallic echo of his mosque's voice. The lightning in the sky attracted to the metal shot down at him, arcing towards his prone form as he held his blade high. "Perfect," he hissed, already in full swing as the power coursed through his blade, which glowed blue, but was also built up by his chakra and then amplified tenfold. "Getsuga Tenshou!" roared Naruto, and with a massive two-handed left-to-right swing, he thrust a massive blue crescent at the bolt of lightning, splitting it clear in half like a hot knife through butter, as the chakra-powered Reitsu went on and on until the lightning was completely ripped asunder. Naruto laughed once more as he held his smoking blade, the steel of which was now hot to the touch. What chance did his adversaries have if even lightning struck him? Clapping was heard, and he spun around, his eyes sparking dangerously but not attacking. Naruto then heard a low, sultry, and very sexy voice through the fading steam as a woman's silhouette appeared. "Good to hear you passed Shunsui's test." A bolt of lightning illuminated the sky, revealing the mysterious woman. Naruto got a good look at her in the dark when lightning struck again. Her honeysuckle eyes shone brightly in the dark, as did her pearly white teeth. "Impressive, you actually got this far?" she purred, sending shivers up his spine, as the air around her seemed to shimmer from her power or a trick of the eye, he couldn't tell. Naruto could see her long violet hair cascading over her back as the lightning illuminated her form once more. He had to admit that the woman had a voluptuous body, as she strained against the tight confines of her outfit, almost like a tan goddess. Her outfit was a basic black tank top with no back or sleeves and long spandex pants that were also strained taut against her form. Her arms were not bare, but were wrapped in a tan material from her elbows to her wrists, with purple crisscrossed lines set against the fabric of her cloth arm guards. Naruto was perplexed by the purpose of such a thing, as well as the tan scarf wrapped around her neck, but he surmised that they might be training weights of some kind. Finally, she wore a pair of long tan boots that ended in a pair of tight purple shoes. "Who are you?" he inquired. "My name is Yoruichi Shiwan, and who are you?" the woman asked as she approached him, her supple hips swaying with each step. "Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze," replied the blonde leaf Junin, standing his ground before biting his lip as her hips brushed against his as she walked past him. Naruto felt her breath hot on his neck, blowing against him, as her voice became more seductive. "Could you please take off that mask so I can see who I'm talking to?" Naruto paused for a moment before deciding there was no harm in revealing his face to this woman, and he removed his mask. My, I've never had such a handsome guest before," Yoruichi cooed as she walked around the blonde Jinchuriki, ogling him. As the tan seductress in front of him reached up to stroke his cheek and Yoruichi stared intently into his carefully guarded eyes, Naruto's body stiffened like a board. Her fingers gently stroked the whisker marks on his face before saying something soothing. "And your eyes are the deepest sapphire blue I've ever seen." Despite his best efforts, Naruto couldn't take his gaze away from the woman in front of him, as she seemed to paralyze his mind and body. Yoruichi's hands traced his jawline before she grabbed the back of Naruto's head and planted one of the most soul-searing kisses on his lips. As he wrapped his arms around Yoruichi, a visibly shocked Naruto succumbed to the pleasurable sensation coursing through his body. Naruto was lost in the moment and began to open his mouth and moaned when he felt Yoruichi's tongue lick at his lips, requesting entrance. As Naruto began to fulfill her wishes, an image of Hinata flashed through his mind, and summoning his waning willpower, he placed both of his hands on her shoulders and gently pushed her away, saying, "Don't." Smirking, she spun around, her hand moving at breakneck speed before stopping inches from his face. "You didn't attack," she said, her face expressionless despite the passionate kiss she had just given him. "I don't hit girls, even when they try to tempt me like that," he said simply, despite the fact that the kiss had left him shaken. A noble and chivalrous response, Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze, but it's ultimately a foolish action to take. Yoruichi then took several steps away from him in an attack stance, her cat-like eyes glinting mischievously. "But this time I'm not going to back down, so you better defend yourself." Naruto reached for his mask and drew it back down, adopting a more aggressive posture. He unwrapped his hilt and slowly began to wind Zangetsu around until it spun in a steady hum from his right hand. Once he had the desired momentum, he threw the blade far out onto the stony plain, where it landed with a metallic clang, point first in the rock, safe from falling into the stormy sea below. What made you do that? Because you were unarmed, I had an unfair advantage. I told you before, your chivalry is misplaced in this situation, the Neko woman said as a white aura surrounded her and a familiar red silhouette crept up Naruto's form. As a geyser of a twister formed in the distance and set upon the foreboding sea, thunder rumbled and lightning flashed brightly across the sky. Here goes. The thin white aura that surrounded Yoruichi suddenly exploded into a blazing white aura of energy that lashed out at anything within striking distance. Its cutting power was so strong that it easily carved large furrows into the land's stone face. It even matched the lightning, shooting up into the clouds in random bursts and occasionally lashing out at Naruto, who deftly sidestepped each blast while remaining focused on Yoruichi. Yoruichi briefly controlled the chaotic Kido, and the orange jacket she was wearing was shredded to pieces by its energies, as the ripped shreds of cloth were caught up in the winds and then torn to nothingness. She let out a loud shout, and the area around her exploded into a 10-foot crater, from which Naruto leapt back. Yoruichi flashed a wicked wild grin as her violet hair, still bound in its hair tie, whipped around her chaotically. Her arms, which had previously been held at her sides, were now held out in front of her in her traditional fighting stance, as stones rose from the earth beneath her and were crushed into nothingness by the sheer force of her energies. Shunko. Flash release, flash release. Naruto simply laughed and crossed his arms in an X. Do you think that's unique? The air shimmered around him, tearing it and shredding his cape, much like Yoruichi's jacket. Allow me to show you something. As his pupils dilated, becoming black slits against his red demonic eyes, crimson crept across his blue eyes, staining them ruby red. As the Kyuubi cloak enveloped Naruto, Yoruichi arched her violet brow and stood her ground. As his red eyes bellied the ferocity that now gripped his very soul, twin tails of red chakra formed behind him, swaying slowly back and forth in the wind. Wait a minute. Naruto gnashed his teeth together in mild pain as his canines grew longer, eventually transforming into vicious fangs. Yoruichi paused and thought as a wicked laugh rose from his throat. Yoruichi murmured to herself, that is truly unique. Flexing his hands, Naruto could feel his fingernails sharpening to the point where they could no longer be called fingernails, but rather deadly claws capable of ripping out a throat in a matter of moments if he so desired. He pierced the skin of his palms, pain coursing through him as he left puncture marks that healed almost instantly, despite the blood dripping down onto the stone. As the changes neared completion, 2 red ears of fox chakra completed the cloak and completely enveloped Naruto. His whisker marks on his face deepened, becoming large deep furrows, his eyes narrowing dangerously, and his heart rate quickening with a sickening rush of adrenaline. Naruto's short blonde hair roughened, if you will, as it warped from spiky tame hair to something wild and unruly sticking out in all directions behind his mask. As the storm raged above them, the earth seemed to tremble beneath him. A raw testament to the power he was accumulating. His voice, which had been calm and collected before, was now filled with wrathful fury. Naruto, now fully powered by the Kyuubi, looked Yoruichi in the eyes as she surveyed the changes he had wrought on himself. The surprise on his opponents' faces at his transformation never grew old for him. The strange thing here was, as she spoke, she was smiling, not a trace of fear visible on her lovely tanned face. That's an unusual technique, but something tells me it's more than just a show of lights. Naruto chuckled, but it was a dark and sinister laugh. As the earth beneath them began to crack and crumble under the combined pressure of their powers, red light mixed with white, illuminating the space between them pink in color. After that, prepare yourself. Yoruichi waved him forward and quipped, swaying from side to side. Enough chit-chat, fox boy. Let's get this done. Each took a step forward, then faded out of sight before reappearing in the center, tightly clasping each other's hands hard enough to draw blood, their eyes narrowing, their mouths set in a grim line, a power struggle now underway. As a shout worked its way up their throats and ripped its way out of their mouths, their respective auras flared brightly in response. As the ground buckled further away from them, lightning struck the sky. Naruto was the first to be released, and Yoruichi winced as 3 lines of blood appeared on her face from his wickedly sharp claws, set on her left cheek. However, he doubled over from a vicious kick in the gut, which collapsed his stomach inward, before vanishing from view, now coming from behind her. His fist passed through the air as he collided with an afterimage that quickly faded away. Damn, she's quick. Yoruichi phased behind him, her mid-air spin kick slicing through a translucent version of him as well. Yoruichi simply smiled and vanished as Naruto slashed down where her chest would have been if she hadn't used an afterimage. At least the Gaki can keep up with me to some extent. This game of cat and mouse, or cat and fox, seemed to go on forever, with each player hitting a left-behind image of their opponent, and so on. Finally, Naruto appeared from above, his hands intertwined, and he swung downward, striking her on the head and knocking her to the ground. Her hands slapped out, breaking her fall and allowing her to pivot and swing her left leg into his neck in a violent jarring kick that snapped his head to the right due to the impact, his face twisted in pain. They vanished once more, leaving white and red shockwaves in their wake, moving too quickly for the naked eye to see their collision. But this was no ordinary battle, no mere clash of wills. This was a once-in-a-lifetime battle. They reappeared briefly, each cocking a fist back as they shot towards each other, and when they collided, a dome of pink light spread out, driving them apart and back into the ground. The 2 titans were all smiles as they skidded backwards, but Naruto slowed his skid early by digging his claws in, and when they came to a halt, he got down on all 4s and laughed. Not bad, Neko-san, but... As a 3rd tail burst forth behind him, violently shaking the stones around him, his feral features progressed further until he could barely be recognized as a human being, yet still bore the appearance of one. I'm only getting started. When Shunsui emerged from the portal into Yamamoto's residence, he clearly did not expect to be met by 2 beautiful young women who immediately assumed battle stances upon his appearance. When his gaze fell on Hinata, his breath caught in his throat, and he quickly flash-stepped in front of her. Before Hinata could react, her hand was kissed as Shunsui kneeled in front of her and waxed poetically. "O radiant dark-haired beauty, there is only one happiness in life, to love and be loved. Please, my fair maiden, grant me such happiness." Hinata was taken aback for a moment by this strange straw-hatted man kneeling before her when a stern shout rang out. "Shunsui, stop making a fool of yourself and start acting like a Gote 13 captain. Why do you always lose control in front of a girl? But, Oyama, she reminds me of my Lisa-chan in Nanao-chan. I don't care who she reminds you of, act yourself. After all, that young woman's heart already belongs to the man you just met. Naruto-sama has won your heart. What a lucky man he is to have such a beautiful treasure in his life." Thank you," Hinata replied nervously. "Who the hell are you?" Yugito demanded angrily. Shunsui noticed Yugito's appearance and turned his attention to her. Yugito had dark eyes and long, straight blonde hair bound with taut bandages. She was dressed in a short-sleeved black and purple blouse and black pants that were both torn and tattered, leaving little to the imagination of the woman's supple body. Shunsui could also detect a large amount of chakra within her. The straw-hatted Gote captain was about to introduce himself when he was interrupted. His name is Shunsui Kyoraku, and he is the proctor of Naruto's first trial. He is also one of my very first students, Yamamoto announced. Does the fact that he's here mean that something has happened to Naruto-kun? Hinata wondered, shielding Nell from Shunsui. Yugito cast a quick glance away from Hinata when she heard the Hyuga girl use a suffix with Naruto's name. Shunsui was aware of this, but he ignored it for the time being and answered Hinata's question. Naruto-sama is fine. I'm just here to accompany Naruto on his quest, which he has graciously granted me permission to do. Nice to have another freaking weirdo join the party, and I'm sure this guy is also a badass. Daisuke reflected to himself. Thank you, Kami, Naruto is fine. You see, Nell, you have nothing to worry about. Your Naru-chan will return soon. The little green-haired girl simply smiled up at Hinata's words before pumping her fist in the air and yelling. Yay, Naru-chan will be back soon, believe it. An Arankar! Exclaimed Shunsui, surprised. Yes, an Arankar Shunsui, but she poses no threat. Now, since you're here, am I correct in assuming that young Naruto passed the first test and is currently undergoing the second? Yeah, he should be there already. By the way, Oyama, what is the second trial? The second test is whether or not he can resist desire. Interesting. Rangaku, Soifan, who did you get to handle that test? I know there's no way you could have gotten Urahara to do it. No, the person who is running that test volunteered for the job. She enjoys the hunt more than the potential reward. Shunsui paused for a moment, thinking about what his mentor had just said, before his eyes lit up and he stammered. You don't mean Yoruichi is running that test? Yamamoto responded with a single nod before Shunsui slapped his hand to his brow and exclaimed. Oh brother, Naruto doesn't have a chance against her. That statement made both Hinata and Yugito nervous, so they both released some killing intent towards the straw hat wearing captain and inquired with a bit of a smirk. Who exactly is Yoruichi? When Naruto's third tail burst forth, Yoruichi visibly stiffened as she felt the tremendous power emanating from him, causing even the earth itself to tremble in fear. What is the source of this boy's power? I've never seen or experienced anything like it before. Where is he getting it? Yoruichi thought as a loud roar erupted across the battlefield. As Naruto roared, his demonic chakra extended from him, wreaking havoc. This outward destructive chakra sphere became so powerful that it began to destroy the surrounding landscape and violently push back on Yoruichi. Yoruichi quickly realized the gravity of the situation and began to channel massive amounts of concentrated energy before a massive explosion erupted around her body, incinerating her clothing on her back and shoulders but leaving her unharmed. Naruto stared in awe at the woman in front of him as she raised her hand and spoke to him with admiration. I'm impressed. I rarely use this technique because of its overwhelming power and difficulty in controlling it, but you forced me to do so twice. A red chakra claw lunged at her, but Yoruichi split it in half with a single swipe of her hand before saying. However, based on the power you're now producing, I know it's the only attack I have that can defeat you. Yoruichi began to walk and then accelerated, moving much faster than before. Her tone was soft and silky, but you could feel the desire for battle beneath it. Be prepared, Naruto-kun. This won't be pretty. Bring it. Naruto said confidently. As you please, Shunko. Flash release. Naruto roared again, unleashing another destructive sphere of demonic chakra that collided with Yoruichi's attack of pure white energy shooting forth from her hand. As the two attacks collided, the converging energies whirled around one another in a bid for dominance, casting a pink hue over the battlefield. Both Naruto and Yoruichi were putting everything they had into their attacks, but it was futile because each one outweighed the other in power and intensity. Gritting his teeth and summoning his demonic chakra to its full potential without losing control or sanity, the blonde Jinchuriki released one final burst of energy, certain that it would put an end to this battle once and for all. He let everything out with one final scream. Raagh. At the same time, Yoruichi let loose the last of her Kido, sending it screaming towards the approaching wave of red. For a brief moment, everything, including time itself, came to a halt. Then a massive explosion rocked the battlefield, and the resulting shockwave blew both combatants apart. Steam rose into the clouds, and rain began to fall seconds later. A few minutes later, as the dust settled over the landscape, then washed away by the steady pitter-patter of water, the two beleaguered opponents staggered towards one another. Their clothes were ripped and they were both bleeding from various cuts on their bodies as they came to a halt in front of one another. Naruto, who was no longer three-tailed, shakily took up a taijutsu stance before hearing the Neko woman state in a sultry voice. "It's over, Naruto-kun. I'm now yours to command and use as you see fit." Yoruichi stood naked before Naruto, her hands sensually gliding over her dark-toned supple body as she removed the tattered remains of all of her clothing. But I haven't defeated you yet," Naruto stammered as he removed his mask. Yoruichi cooed seductively in his ear as she stepped forward and stroked Naruto's cheek with her hand, her ample naked breasts mere inches from his own bare chest. "There's no point in continuing, you've won. I've exhausted all of my power, but if you still want to expend some energy, there are more pleasurable ways to do so than fighting." Naruto didn't realize what the tanned beauty in front of him meant until he felt her hand slip inside the waistband of his ripped pants and grip his now growing member. Yoruichi grabbed the back of Naruto's head and pulled him into a soul-searing kiss, her tongue lashing at his own inside his mouth. Naruto's eyes glazed over before rolling to the back of his head and he fell backwards, landing with a thud on the ground. The strain of the battle and Yoruichi's meddling with his senses proved too much for the young Jinchuriki to bear. Yoruichi smirked as she knelt down and draped her naked body over Naruto's prone body, as the stress of the battle overtook her as well, and she too collapsed unconscious. Meanwhile, two of Konoha's elite Junin were searching for their missing students in a forest. Kurenai was worried about Hinata and was determined to find her before Kiba. Kurenai had no doubt after speaking with Shino before they left that if Kiba managed to reach Hinata first, there would be violence. She and Kakashi had worked extremely hard to cover as much ground as they had. The sun was about to set, and they needed to make a camp somewhere. But Kurenai believed they could go a few more miles before stopping for the night. Looking over at Kakashi, she was perplexed as to how her partner on this mission never seemed to trip or lose his footing while his nose was buried in that damn orange book. The two Junin came across a deep chasm with a river running through it after breaking through a forest opening. They paused to catch their breath and silently considered how to overcome this challenge before Kakashi spoke up and said, "I believe there is a town 5 to 6 miles downriver that has a ferry and where we could cross, Kurenai." Kurenai didn't want to waste time by detouring to this town, so she struggled to think of another solution before her eyes were drawn to a rope and wood-planked bridge 200 yards away. Kurenai spoke up and replied, pointing to her discovery. "We don't need to do that. There's a rope bridge over there. We can cross without losing any time." The two Junin became more aware of the bridge's rough and unkempt state as they approached it. Following a thorough examination, Kakashi turned to the crimson-eyed Kunoichi and said, "I think we should go to town and cross there, because this bridge has seen better days, and I don't want to take a cold bath in that river right now." "Kakashi, are we afraid of a little water?" Junin, with his silver hair, gave her a deadpan look before declaring, "No, the 600-foot drop to the water is too much for me." She shoved him to one side, growling, "Do whatever you want, but we'll waste too much time going to that town, so I'll cross here." His hand on her shoulder came to a halt. "I'm not sure you should do that." She slapped his hand away, perhaps with more force than was necessary, and stalked over to the bridge. "Don't tell me what you're doing, Kakashi. I need to find Hinata and the others right away. Unlike you, I am invested in this mission." Kurenai snapped this in annoyance and anger before stepping onto the bridge and making her way across slowly and carefully. Kurenai turned to look back at Kakashi, who was still standing at the entrance, eyeing her carefully, and stated with a little smugness ringing in her voice, "I'm about halfway across. As you can see, this bridge is in good condition." A moment later, the sound of snapping greeted the two Konoha Junin as one of the support ropes between her and Kakashi snapped, causing one side of the bridge to fall vertically, sending Kurenai falling before she could grab onto the remaining support rope. Unfortunately, Kurenai lost her field pack and all of her supplies as she could only hang on for dear life as it all fell into the churning water below her. Kurenai heard the same snapping sound as she attempted to pull herself up and looked over to see that the remaining support rope was breaking, resigning herself to either being slammed into the cliffside with the bridge or letting go of the rope she clung to and taking her chances with the river. Kurenai was about to let go when Kakashi jumped over and wrapped his arm around her waist, grabbing the remaining support rope. Just as it snapped. As the bridge and its two occupants swung downward in an arc towards the cliffside, Kakashi used his body to cushion Kurenai's impact and take it all himself. Oomph. Kakashi grunted as he slammed into the cliffside, feeling a couple of stinging pops from his ribcage before a wave of pain flooded his mind, he thought. Damn. I can't concentrate and focus enough chakra to my feet to climb up the cliff face with Kurenai, so I guess I'll have to do it the hard way. The one-eyed shinobi chokedly said to Kurenai, gritting his teeth. Climb onto my back, Kurenai, and I'll get us out of here. Hi. Kurenai deftly maneuvered onto Kakashi's back, locking her arms around his throat without choking the silver-haired nin, and then Kakashi began the arduous and painful task of climbing up the rope with Kurenai hanging onto him like a backpack. A short time later, a wheezing Kakashi crawled over the top of the cliff with Kurenai in tow, panting on the ground, each breath of air like a knife to the chest due to his broken ribs. As Kakashi lay there trying to control his pain, he heard Kurenai quietly speak up and say with repentance. "Thank you for saving me, Kakashi. I should have listened to you sooner. My haste to find Hinata nearly cost me my life due to my folly. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. Her face was etched with sadness. "I'm sorry for not listening to you." Kakashi could hear Kurenai's regret in her voice as she looked at her forlorn expression. Kurenai was one of the most beautiful women Kakashi had ever seen, but he also knew she was a very proud woman. He struggled to sit up and disliked seeing her in such a penitent state. He needed to say something to shake her out of her self-pity, and he came up with the perfect thing, even though he knew he'd pay for it later. "Don't worry, Kurenai. I just have one question for you. Have you gained weight?" Kurenai's thoughts of remorse and self-reproach vanished as soon as he heard Kakashi's question. "How come you?" She watched as his lone visible eye rolled to the back of his head and he flopped to the ground once more, just as she was about to tear him apart limb from limb. Kurenai rushed over to him, sensing that this was no act or joke on Kakashi's part. She saw that Kakashi was indeed unconscious, and for the first time she noticed his arm clutching to his side. Tearing open his shirt, Kurenai noticed the unsightly black and blue discoloration around his ribcage and realized Kakashi had carried her all the way up that cliff with broken ribs and never said anything to her. Kurenai dragged Kakashi over to a small crop of trees to shade themselves while she tended to his injuries, shaking her head in admiration and concern for her fellow Junin. Yugito kept a close eye on the Hyuga girl as Hinata tucked Nell into bed, before glancing over to see Shunsui and Yamamoto wrapped up in their own conversation, keeping their distance from the two women, as they had been less than pleased after hearing about Naruto's second trial in Yoruichi's description. Daisuke was sound asleep in a chair, snoring softly because he had stuffed tissue paper up his nose to prevent loud and obnoxious snoring. This seemed like the ideal opportunity to speak with the Hyuga girl about something that had been bothering Yugito all day. Before Hinata asked, the two women quietly slipped into another room and sat down, calling over to the lavender-eyed girl. Can you tell me something about Yugito-san? Her dark brown eyes shifted into Hinata's pale lavender ones. What made you do it? She asked the obvious question, perplexed. What did I do, Yugito-san? Yugito's tone of voice hardened as he assumed she was playing dumb. How come you saved me from that trap in the corridor earlier today? I'm not sure I understand your question, Yugito-san. Why would I not try to save you? Yugito's tone had become bitter. Oh, I don't know, princess? How about the fact that I don't know you and you don't know me? Why would you risk your life for a total freaking stranger? Hinata paused for a moment to consider her response before quietly saying, I understand Yugito-san, and that's fine. I guess I saved you out of instinct, but I don't regret it. I know you're important to Naruto-kun. And a friendly smile. Which means you're important to me as well. That makes no sense, princess. Perhaps not, Yugito-san, but I adore Naruto-kun, so whatever or whoever he cares about, I will care about as well. A tense moment passed before Hinata spoke up again. May I ask Yugito-san a question? What? Before speaking, the Hyuga heiress paused and took a deep breath. Are you a fan of Naruto-kun? Yugito blushed slightly in response to Hinata's question before turning to the side and growling. Grr, I'm not sure what I think about the blonde Gaki. After what happened to me at the hands of the Akatsuki, I'm not sure what love is anymore, but when I'm around him, I feel things I've never felt before. Her voice softened as she tilted her head to one side. Perhaps that's love. Yugito's face hardened into frustration and he exclaimed. I'm not sure. All I know is that he's important to me. She now casts a dark glance at Hinata. Which is why I don't want to see him suffer any longer, something I know you've done to him before. Hinata lowered her head slightly as the memory of what happened between her and Naruto 3 years ago flashed through her mind, shaking her head to drive the memory away and focus on the reconciliation the two had shared hours earlier. I'll never hurt Naruto again. I'd rather die first. Yugito stared at the Hyuga girl, trying to find any sign that she was lying, but her Neko instincts confirmed that Hinata was telling the truth. Yugito huffed in annoyance and turned away, her arms crossed over her ample chest, an area in which the Hyuga girl rivaled her. Make sure you don't, or you'll have to answer to me, princess. Hinata had had enough of being referred to as that. My name is Hinata, Yu-Gi-Oh-san. Hinata then grabbed Yugito's shoulder and forced her to look her way. Look, I don't want to fight you, Yugito-san, because it would hurt Naruto-kun. I know Naruto-kun loves you because you're here with him, and I accept that. Her voice now has a pleading tone to it. Could you do the same for me? I don't want to be your enemy. Instead, if you give me the chance, I'd much rather be your friend. Yugito paused for a moment before answering Hinata's question. I'm not sure, Prince. Hinata? I've never had a friend before. Where do we start? Well, since Naruto-kun is our common bond, why don't we start with how you and Naruto met, and then I'll tell you how Naruto and I met, and we'll go from there. It took some time, but eventually both women began to open up about themselves and talked all night, and when Naruto returned, he would see a much different relationship between the two women than he had seen before he left. He would see a friendship. Kakashi awoke with a start, noticing that the sky was dark and dotted with stars, which was unusual given that his last memory was of the sun shining down on him. As he wiggled out of his sleeping bag, Kakashi noticed that he was also shirtless and had bandages wrapped tightly around his torso and ribs, and it was then that he heard Kurenai comment. It's good to see you're finally awake again. He looked around before spotting her. How long have I been gone, and where are we? We've been driving for about 4 hours and are about a mile from the bridge, which is as far as I could drag you." As she stared at Kakashi, who was suddenly thinking, a wicked glint entered her eyes. "Uh-oh. Kakashi, have you gained weight?" Kurenai inquired flatly. Kakashi winced again at the tone of Kurenai's question before apologizing as best he could. "I apologize for my previous remark, Kurenai. I didn't mean it. I just wanted you to think about something other than the bridge disaster at the time. I didn't mean to offend or hurt you." Kurenai's face softened as she heard Kakashi's response, and a pang of guilt tugged at her heart before she said anything. "No, Kakashi, it is I who should apologize. You were injured while rescuing me from the bridge fiasco, as you call it. I sincerely apologize. Why didn't you tell me you'd broken some ribs in the process? You must have struggled to breathe while climbing that rope carrying me." He winced at the mention of his ribs, but managed to continue speaking. "It didn't matter at the time because there was nothing we could do while dangling from that rope." He shrugged, but regretted it immediately as pain screamed through his body. "As a result, I didn't think it was necessary to inform you about it. I suppose you're right, but I still feel bad that you were hurt as a result of my carelessness. You've already apologized, Kurenai, and I accept your apology. Besides, my ribs don't hurt nearly as much as they used to, and they didn't bandage themselves. So thank you for looking after me while I was ill." Kurenai blushed slightly, thankful that it was nighttime and Kakashi couldn't see it, as the crimson-eyed woman's mind flashed back to his well-toned chest and abs. Kurenai replied with a slight stammer. It wasn't anything, Kakashi. I used a bone-mending jutsu Hinata taught me, and if I did it correctly, your ribs should be completely healed in a few days. Well, I'd say you did an excellent job. I'm not in nearly as much pain as I was earlier, Kakashi said absently before looking across and noticing Kurenai shivering in the moonlight. Kakashi then expressed concern about how cold it had become that night. Why don't you get some rest and warm up in your sleeping bag, Kurenai? You're shivering. Remember, I lost my sleeping bag and all of my supplies in the river. Kakashi had forgotten about it, and after assessing their situation, he reached over and opened the flap to his sleeping bag, silently inviting Kurenai to share his sleeping bag. Kurenai blushed even more at her silver-haired comrade's action and said cynically, Are you serious? I'm not going to get into that with you. Kakashi simply sighed in response to the Genjutsu mistress' response before saying, It's either that or you freeze tonight, and you act as if I'm doing it for some sinister reason. Aren't you? She retorted. Kakashi's voice took on a hurt, prideful tone. I would do this for any of my shinobi comrades, Kurenai. Like who? She retorted. Before saying anything, Kakashi took a moment to think. Besides you, Anko-chan, Yugo-chan, Shizune-chan, Tsunade-sama, and a few others. She gave him a scathing look. Exactly, I noticed that all of your examples were kunoichis. His lone visible eye curved upwards into his infamous eye smile, and he shrugged, rolling his shoulders. Were they? I hadn't noticed. She had a bizarre thought. Tell me, Kakashi, if Guy was here, would you make the same offer? Kakashi's breath caught in his throat for a moment at the unsettling prospect before he declared. Guy has his youth flames to keep him warm, Kurenai, you don't. Kurenai paused for a moment before a cold wind blew through their camp, making her shiver even more. She said nervously, turning back to Kakashi. Okay, I'll take your offer. But if you do something stupid, you won't see the morning after. He raised his hands in a surrendering gesture. There's nothing funny, I swear, and I'm curious about a Konoha urban legend anyway. Kurenai cautiously crawled into the sleeping bag and snuggled up against Kakashi, tentatively wrapping his arms around her to warm her up. Kurenai, as she settled in, recalled Kakashi's strange remark about a Konoha urban legend and inquired. "What did you mean by being curious about a Konoha urban legend, Kakashi?" "Well, Kurenai, there's been a rumor in the Leaf Village for a few years that if any man got into bed with the Genjutsu Ice Queen of Konoha, he'd be instantly frozen." As he continued, her face turned a bright beet red. "I must say, I'm glad to dispel that myth, as I'm very comfortable right now," Kakashi replied, chuckling, earning him an elbow to the stomach in Kurenai's statement. "I don't instantly freeze the men, Kakashi, but you might find yourself frozen by the morning." Kakashi paused for a moment before wrapping his arms around Kurenai even more tightly and responding. "I'll take a chance." Kurenai blushed again and gave a small smile before falling asleep. Several hours later, Naruto's eyes widened sharply, and he looked around as rain fell haphazardly in his eyes. Zangetsu was now resting in his hand, and as he squeezed it reflexively, he felt a little more relaxed. However, he felt a weight on his chest and turned to find Yoruichi's honeysuckle yellow eyes staring into his, her naked body draped over his. "What the hell happened?" Naruto exclaimed, scrambling out from under Yoruichi and leaping to his feet. The bemused look on Naruto's face brought a wry smile to Yoruichi's face as she sensed victory was near, before she began to bewitchingly crawl on all fours towards the young man who seemed to be mesmerized by her movements. Upon reaching her sexual prey, Yoruichi rose up onto her toes a little to brush her lips against his in a slow lingering movement that caused their lips to latch onto. Sighing, Yoruichi melted into the kiss and to him, molding her body against his perfect one as she let him dominate her. Yoruichi's hand began to caress Naruto's six-pack stomach, ribs, and finally his nipples, the other hand grabbing his well-toned ass and squeezing it. As the Kyuubi shouted in his mind, Naruto moaned loudly at this action. "Take this woman right now, Kit." Before spinning Yoruichi around and pulling her back into his chest, Naruto's eyes flared red, and he stepped out of his ripped pants. Naruto's tongue slid along Yoruichi's ear as he reached around with both hands to grab and fondle her ample breasts. "You sexy minx, you really want this?" "Ah!" shrieked Yoruichi as he drew her earlobe into his mouth, sucking on it harshly and scraping it with his teeth. I was all Yoruichi could say in delight as Naruto began dragging his tongue down and around the nape of her neck, tasting the soft and alluring fragrance of her skin mixed with the small beads of sweat that were forming from her need and his proximity to her. Yoruichi moaned loudly and pressed her hips against him before her eyes widened as she felt Naruto's members sliding along the folds of her pussy, and the Neko woman whimpered in desperation to feel Naruto inside of her. "Please, Naruto-kun. Please, my little minx?" Naruto replied coolly, as he felt Yoruichi pushing back against him in desperate need, gasping at the sensation of his hardness sliding back and forth between her moistening folds. Please take me now," Yoruichi yelled. Naruto laughed and continued to teasingly stroke her, resting his head against her shoulder to nibble on her neck as he reached down to line himself up at her entrance and finally give Yoruichi what she desired, but just as he was about to thrust deep inside her, an image of Hinata flashed across his mind as before, and he remembered her words prior to the start of these trials. "Just know that I will always love you and be there for you, no matter what." Naruto then roared in frustration as he pushed Yoruichi away from him, mustering all of his strength. "Noah." Yoruichi was taken aback when he turned around to see Naruto putting on his pants and growling with conviction. "No, I will not betray Hinata in this manner." Despite her frustration, Yoruichi couldn't help but be amazed that Naruto had resisted her, and she took a deep breath to try to calm herself down. "Congratulations, Naruto-kun. You have finally won and passed the second trial." "What exactly do you mean? I thought you said I was already the winner." The sun began to shine behind Yoruichi, peeking out from behind the gray clouds and illuminating her naked form, and Naruto had been wondering where he had found the strength to turn away such an exquisite beauty when he heard her answer. That was a bit of a lie on my part. You see, this was not a combat test, but rather a test of your ability to resist desire and temptation, which you just did. Just barely, Naruto mumbled to himself. Don't be too hard on yourself, Naruto-kun. I've been emitting an enormous amount of pheromones since we started our little dance yesterday. To be honest, I expected you to throw me down and take me as soon as I surrendered to you. I'm not sure who this Hinata is, but she's definitely got a power over you to resist me, Yoruichi said, her voice a little irritated and frustrated. Naruto was about to say something when he heard a familiar hum as the dimensional rift opened behind Yoruichi. Come on, it's time for us to leave. Where are you going? He grumbles, rising to his feet, his Zanpakuto gleaming in the morning light. She winks and takes one step through. Do you think you'll go back to old man Yamamoto's? Naruto's eyes widen with fear as he realizes Yoruichi is still naked, and he screams in panic. You're still naked. Why don't you put some clothes on first? Yoruichi replied calmly, I'll just get some on the other side, before grabbing Naruto's hand and yanking him into the portal.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.